he just went low. He's in his head. He's in his head. He's open. His head wide open. Cracked open in the face.
Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Macarthur Bulls 100 back in another episode of How's My Team. We've actually got a shorter week this week because obviously the Titans are not playing this week. Obviously Vegas with NRL starts this week, so they won't play until next week. The Wanderers women obviously are off as well in preparation for a lot of international friendlies and also the AFC Women's Asian Cup competition, obviously which Australia is a part of. So they'll be playing for that. So realistically, we've only got a few things to talk about. We've got the Wanderers playing against Macarthur Bulls in Western Derby. We've got Liverpool playing against West Ham, and we've also got their opponents for the round of 16 legs in the Champions League as well. That was confirmed over the middle of the week this week. And we also have the Giants obviously playing their final preseason game against the Swans before obviously the lead up next week into opening round against the Hawks. So a few things to talk about. Obviously we could talk about the Cubs as well and some miscellaneous stuff, but it's going to be a shorter week this week because obviously we don't have as much to talk about, and then obviously we'll be back on with almost a full slate next week. It's going to be crazy, so we'll see what happens, but yeah, let's get on with the episode. Alright, it's Sunday morning. I've actually got a jersey on because when I recorded the intro to this video, I actually had just a normal shirt on. I didn't even realise, I completely forgot to change shirts, but I had to do the intro pretty quickly before I had to head to work yesterday, so kind of forgot. But you wouldn't know because you didn't really see anything. Underneath my chin, really, or my neck, you didn't really get to see my shirt in the intro, but we'll get to talking about the Wanderers men's team obviously a little bit later. Obviously it is Sunday morning, but I kind of want to wait for table results to update, especially with games today in the A-League and also in the Premier League tonight as well. We'll eventually get to that as well, so I'll record a bunch of that tomorrow. But we can talk about obviously the Giants. The Giants obviously played their preseason game, their last preseason game in the Amy Community Series, and obviously before the season starts next weekend against the Swans midweek, obviously on Thursday, and it was a pretty wet day in Henson Park, and it was a 38-point loss to the Swans. I tried to keep up with this game a little bit. I did keep up with it after halftime because I did have a decent day at work in terms of length of time, and I think around my lunch break I tried to see what the score was. I think they were behind. They were at some stage. I think they were behind by like 30 odd points. I think towards going into towards halftime. And then the Giants kicked a couple of goals and a couple of behinds to get it, I think, to 12 points. But they were pretty much behind a bunch in this game. They didn't really lead the game at all. But in saying that, out of the first 23, there was a few people missing, obviously. Some due to injury, obviously that Tom Green, Josh Kelly, that sort of thing. And there's a few players that were out as well during this game. Ultimately, the article does say the injury hit Giants were missing 11 of the players that lined up for their elimination final defeat against the Hawks last season. Clayton Oliver had a good showing. I think he had at least a goal to his name in the game. But yeah, it was 97 to 59 point loss. 14 goals, 13 for the Swans, and 8 goals, 11 for the Giants. I think towards the end of the game, I think obviously the behinds get popping up for both teams, especially the Giants in terms of their scoring, which kind of sucked. Yeah, Errol Goulden for the Sydney Swans, kind of giving a scare for the Swans. Don't know if he's. They think that he should be available for opening round, obviously, which will be on. I think they're playing Friday night, I believe, if not Thursday, for opening round. The Swans against Carlton at the SCG. So they think that he's rolled his ankle. But it was a pretty wet day, and the rain was coming down pretty much all day. It was coming down up here in the south coast. So I don't doubt that in Sydney it was a hell of a lot worse. And I've seen some of the highlights of some of the goals in this game, and it was very wet. So I don't doubt people getting injured, rolling ankles, and all that type of stuff, and obviously not playing. Some of their best players in this game, obviously the Giants and the Swans definitely did. Obviously Charlie Curnow was in the game. He scored at least a goal, if not a couple, for the Swans, obviously moving over from Carlton to Sydney in a big trade. Ultimately, obviously Clayton Oliver, like I said, did reasonably well. Like I said, he got on the score sheet with a goal at least. And he did pretty well in terms of disposals, and obviously being a leader, obviously towards the back of the team, like on the field. I feel like he's going to be a very experienced head, and ultimately, if he has a good season for the Giants, that's going to be great because, especially when it comes to trades, sometimes it isn't always the best thing. You don't always get the best out of some players, but sometimes you do, and it just depends on how they play. But yeah, obviously all focus will be on this weekend coming up, obviously against the Hawks in opening round on Saturday in the afternoon. Obviously I will be at work, so I will not be going to this game, and I don't think I'll be going to the St Kilda game either, which kind of sucks because a lot of the weekends that some of these games do fall on, I won't be able to go to some of these games, like some of the home games. Like the next closest game I think I should be able to go to is the Sydney Derby, the Battle of the Bridge at the SCG. So if I get into a situation, obviously that won't be part of my membership. Obviously I'm sorting out my Giants membership now, trying to sort that out, trying to make sure that I can get some tickets on the way to go to some home games this season, and just work around my work schedule because my work roster's switched weekends, and it's a situation where it starts on obviously the weekend of opening round. So so ultimately, if we can go to that game, obviously it'll be in Sydney at the SCG for the first fixture of the Battle of the Bridge. If I can buy some tickets to go to that, I will go to that, and obviously it'll be first game of the season. But realistically, when it comes to some of the big games, like ultimately, I think the Gold Coast one, that's a weekend and it falls on the weekend I have off, but that's in Canberra, which I guess is not too far away from where I am. I think it's a couple of hours, but still. But I got to work out what games to go to because I think I've obviously got that. There's a game with Essendon home. Obviously, the weekend off is when they go to West Coast. There's obviously the battle against Brisbane, which I'd love to go to. I think that's probably one that I will, and it's around my birthday as well. So I got to work out what I'm doing around my birthday because it could be away, it could not be away. I don't know at this point in time. But a lot of the games some of the weekends that I fall on are in Melbourne or away, which kind of sucks. That's the St Kilda game in Melbourne, and then obviously the home game against the Carlton Blues. That's Fremantle. That's Canberra. So so Fremantle in Canberra, Essendon. It's just one of those things where it's just falling on the wrong weekend now. Hawthorn, that's in Melbourne. Geelong, I think Geelong will be one that I will go to, 6th of July, especially against the Cats. We've had some good success against the Cats. Obviously, 2 weeks later, we have the Swans as well, later in the season. And then obviously, that Gold Coast game, round 22s in Canberra. I think that's the last Canberra game, I think, of the season for the Giants. And then obviously a week later, they've got West Coast at home, and then away in the Adelaide Oval for the last round against the Crows. So I've got to work out my work schedule, obviously. I probably will need to take some time off for some of the games, obviously, that I can go to. So not a bad situation, obviously not a great situation in terms of losing heavily, like 38 points. But again, we played a few juniors in the game, which definitely did help things, and obviously some of them did show out as well, which is great because we're going to need it, especially obviously since Tom Green's out. Josh Kelly, you would think, be out most of the season, if not the entire year. It just depends on how bad his injury is and how good his recovery is going to be. And obviously, if more players get injured during the season, we'll see what happens with that. Obviously, we have a situation like Kieran Briggs goes down. Obviously, we got Mannon on the fringe to play in the ruck role if need be as well. Obviously, we've got some experienced heads around the middle. Obviously, we'll want Finn Callahan in the team as much as possible. Obviously, he's out with injury for the first couple of weeks, I think. Brent Daniels also went down for an injury, I think, last week. Pretty sure it was, again. But I think he's only out for a couple of rounds at this point. It just depends on some of those big injuries as well. In the season, obviously, as I said, Tom Green, he's out. He's done his ACL, so he's going to be out for this full season, which is not ideal for the for the Giants, because obviously in the middle he's an absolute gun, and racks up a lot of disposals in the middle. Obviously, you could share that around with Clayton Oliver in that area. Obviously Toby Green, if he drops back a bit into more a midfield role, he could fill that as well. It just depends on some of the speed in there, and obviously if Finn Callahan comes back in, he can slot in there around that spot as well in the midfield, because we need some speed through there, because Tom Green's not slow. We'll say that for sure. He's not obviously the fastest player on the team. Obviously there's some people like Darcy Jones. He's another one. He's out for most of the season, I think. If he's available, it'll be towards the second half of the season, if not towards the end of this season. Obviously doing his leg in the elimination final, which was not ideal for him, but hopefully we'll have him back. He's going through rehab. I think he's going through rehab right now, and hopefully he's getting into a situation where it's a positive look on his rehab, and if it gets him back sooner, if he's progressing well, that's awesome. Obviously we don't want to push it, because you don't want to re-injure it and then just be out for longer. But if it's a situation where obviously that he's back earlier, that's great for the team, obviously. But obviously if it's just progressing nicely, that's great as well, because we just want him back on the field at some point in the future, obviously for his career, and just playing well, and back on the field, playing the game that he loves, like obviously with Tom Green as well, and Josh Kelly, obviously experienced head as well. Love to see him back too. So it'll be good, because obviously we'll get Stephen Cognilio back into the side. Obviously he was injury ravaged last season for quite a bit, but especially towards the end of the season, obviously he didn't play that much. But ultimately he'll be back. I think he'll be back for opening round. He's obviously played in some of those preseason games as well, obviously, and training hard, which is great. And hopefully he'll be back into full swing as well. So we've got some players obviously on the fringe that are going to be in the side, obviously due to injuries in and around the side, but hopefully we can show out against the Hawks next week. And then obviously the season will be back up and running. Our first bye obviously is in round 4, which obviously is a weekend that I have off, which is great. And I mean that sarcastically because it's like, yeah, I mean, they're going to have, a bye and a breather. I think that's the week before gather round, if not 2 weeks beforehand. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that. I think that's why that Richmond game, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm off on that weekend, but at the same time it's gather round, so they're not going to be at home. They're going to be in South Australia, which is like, fuck. But, what can you do? It is a situation. It is what it is. But obviously I'll work out when it comes to my work schedule, work out dates to go to games, and then obviously work out my membership around that. Obviously, I think that, like I said, the Geelong game obviously will be one that I really want to go to, which obviously is at home. The Brisbane game is obviously a weekend that falls on a weekend that I'm working. I'd have that off and play that and watch that game. Obviously, see the Swans as well. Obviously, one of the Battle of the Bridges, if not both of them this year. Even if I have to go to the SCG for the first one and then watch the one at NG Stadium on the way back, that's fine. That'll be obviously the 3 games of the 4 tickets that I usually can get during the season. And then I'll work out, obviously, a home game that I'd love to go to. Obviously, I'd love to see them against the Saints in a couple of weeks, but obviously, it's probably not looking like that's going to be the case. I think, obviously, the week before, I think we're watching some NRL. Obviously, won't be my Titans, but obviously we'll get to the Titans next week as well, because obviously they start their season starts next week too. Technically, obviously their season starts. Obviously the NRL season starts this weekend. Obviously it starts today actually, at the time of recording. But yeah, so we'll be back up and running with both the NRL and the AFL starting next week proper. So hopefully the Giants can put up a good fight in opening round against the Hawks. But we'll see what happens. Obviously, we want revenge, obviously, for the elimination final. As it was a good game, like I will say, like ultimately both teams showed up. Obviously, the Giants, they kind of faltered a little bit towards the start of the game, and not relatively towards the end of the game, but especially the start was a bit slow. And ultimately, hopefully, they can fix that up, because that's something that kind of killed them last year was slow starts. And holding possession, we need to improve. So those 2 things we really need to improve. Obviously, starting out relatively alright in terms of points to get the momentum going for the team, because obviously the end in a lot of games, obviously, especially when we're behind and in losses, a lot of the ends of the game that the Giants played, they played relatively well. Obviously, one of the big standouts obviously was the home leg of the Battle of the Bridge at NG Stadium last year against the Swans. Obviously, that's a big one. Obviously, the swing that we had in that elimination final, that's another example that showed that the Giants would come home late and come home with a heap of momentum late in games as well. Would pick up. Obviously, that Richmond game as well when they were well behind. And obviously, when Callum Ward got injured, obviously that run back after the third quarter into the fourth and win the game. It is a situation where if we can balance that out, obviously do relatively well in like the end stretches as well and score, but obviously not get to as slow as a start in games than we had last year. I think we're relatively going to be okay. But obviously they'll start next week. We'll see what happens. But 38-point loss to the Swans, not ideal, but again, pre-season, so we'll see what happens. And obviously, a few people out, obviously, for the Giants in that game as well. So we'll see what happens. And opening round starts this weekend coming, so that's going to be interesting. We'll see what happens with that. Then we move on to the A-League, and obviously the Wanderers men's team. Obviously the women's team is not playing, obviously due to international games, and obviously the AFC Women's Asian Cup is playing. It's actually started last night, and we'll get to that in the miscellaneous stuff when we get to that. But obviously Western Derby between Western Sydney and Macarthur Bulls needed a result here for the Wanderers to kind of get off the bottom of the ladder, or at least try to, and also get into a situation of trying to play for pride as well as obviously play for their future, possibly get into the top 6 if they keep getting points. And it was a 4-0 drubbing from Western Sydney over Macarthur Bulls. So crazy result. I watched all of this game apart from actually even seeing the first goal. I was actually having dinner when the first goal happened. We did actually have a disallowed goal from Angus Thurgate as well, which I also missed, but apparently that was overturned by VAR. Not sure. I'll just scroll back quite a bit. But I'm not sure why it was disallowed. Went in the wrong tab. But it was a situation where it was disallowed. Obviously, Steven Jugarkovic finally scored. He scored in the 6th minute of this game. First goal of the season. It says it's first time since December 6, 2024 against the Brisbane Roar that he scored. And ultimately, it's not a situation where he hasn't been in a situation where he's tried to score. Angus Thurgate did try to score in the 14th minute. Then VAR overturned it. I think it might have been because an attacking player was in the way of the defence of the goalkeeper. I am not 100% sure if that's what it was. But it was overturned. Then Brian Krayev. Then Krayev scored. I'm not going to say his first name because I'm going to butcher it. I just said Brian, but it wasn't. That's not his first name. Krayev scored in the 24th minute. Was a little bit controversial in terms of the argument that Luke Bratton was going to try and get to the ball off a pass by De Silva that went a little bit wide and obviously run into the referee. But I think even if the referee wasn't there, I don't think that Luke Bratton would have got there fast enough to get that ball and make a real good play at it. And I know I'm saying that I'm a Wanderers fan saying that, but I think even if I took the cap off of being a Wanderers supporter, Luke Bratton, much older fella, hasn't been too fast in terms of games previously in the last few years. He's a fast guy, but not that fast compared to some of the other players that are on the field. I don't think he would have made it, and ultimately the goal stood. Could have been overturned by VAR, but obviously it wasn't. Then of a mistake from the goalkeeper, who I think is Robinson for Macarthur, I think. Yeah, Alexander Robinson. Kind of played a pass very close to his defender, missed the defender, and then Ryan Fraser again scored in the 43rd minute. Off that mistake, he just kind of lobbed it over the goalkeeper's head. Goalkeeper's well out of his 6-yard box. So, star strikers just do what star strikers do. They just, put it in the back of the net, lobbed it over, didn't even hit the ground before it even went in the net. So, pretty great. I looked at that and I'm like, yeah, that's just what Ryan Fraser does, because good strikers just do that. They capitalise on a mistake like that, and they'll just do a nonchalant lob shot to get it in the goal. Then it was pretty even. There was a lot of attacking football from Macarthur, especially in the second half. So we're up 3-0 at halftime. Could have been 4 or 5, to be honest, especially with obviously the Angus Thurgate overturned VAR decision, and also 1 or 2 shots on goal that didn't actually go in goal that should have probably went in goal, or a couple of opportunities that should have probably been in the back of the net as well. And it wasn't until the 70th minute, after some masterclass play from Scaluna, absolutely great with his feet. I tell you, it's one of those situations where seeing that in action, Dylan Scaluna, great feet, footwork, got it past about 3 or 4 of the Macarthur Bulls players, passed it right across the, from the wing, right into the box, right into the foot of Brandon Borrello, who ended up scoring for the first time in a long time in open play in the 70th minute. So great result for the Wanderers. And also kind of thanks to Sydney FC, and we'll get to that in a second as to why I'm saying thank you to them. But basically what I said last week in terms of possession game is what happened in this game. Macarthur ended up having 61% of possession. Most of that I would assume is the second half, because Macarthur were very much on the attack for most of the second half, and even some of the first half, but a lot of the second half. 19 shots on goal to 6, whereas it was 5 shots for the Wanderers on target compared to 3 shots for Macarthur. So obviously 83% in terms of shooting accuracy for the Wanderers, whereas it was 16% for the Macarthur. Realistically, great result for the Wanderers. Ultimately, pass accuracy was less as well, less by 7% compared to Macarthur. It's just Macarthur just made a few mistakes extra and just couldn't. The defence stood their ground in this game for the Wanderers, which I feel like that is something that we needed to do. They needed to do that for quite a long time. And like I said, it was basically an opposite, with the stats. I said that ultimately, we've led the stats in terms of possession and lost games over the last few weeks, and in 2026 in general. And we kind of need to do the opposite. They did the opposite and they ended up winning. So I don't know if it's a winning formula or not, but, it definitely helps with the result. And what I will say when it comes to Sydney FC, obviously I did thank them. It was a 1-0 win over Wellington Phoenix, which means with the win, that means that the Wanderers are off the bottom of the ladder. Yes, on the same amount of points as Wellington Phoenix, but obviously if Wellington even got a draw out of the game against Sydney FC, they still would have been in front of the Wanderers. So in terms of the table, and I wanted to do this today rather than yesterday because of obviously the game with Wellington and didn't want to jump the gun. We have still Newcastle Jets on top with 37 points. Not far behind them is Auckland FC with 35, 2-point margin. I think Newcastle and Auckland play each other in the next couple of weeks as well. In fact, I'll go to round 20. No, they don't play this week coming, but they do play on the 14th of March against each other. So that's going to be very, very one of those games that you're going to have to watch, because that's going to be a cracker of a game, especially with how their form has been, both of those teams as of late. Third is Sydney FC with 32 points after that win, obviously, over Wellington Phoenix. Fourth position, dropping to fourth position, is Adelaide United with 30. Obviously, was in third position before Sydney FC overtook it from yesterday's result. Fifth position is Melbourne Victory with 28 points. Sixth position is still Macarthur Bulls with 25. They still hold on to that. Hold on to that position. Seventh position is the Mariners, Central Coast, with 23 points. A few results obviously kind of going the way of Western Sydney as well. in that, and obviously Macarthur as well. Obviously, despite the loss. So Mariners in 7th position, also on 23 points. In 8th position is Brisbane Roar. They did relatively well in their game. Actually got a draw out of the game against the Mariners. Sorry, what am I talking about? Sorry, the Mariners drew with Newcastle Jets, so they actually ended up playing alright. But Brisbane actually ended up having a draw as well against Perth Glory. I knew there was a draw somewhere, I just forgot which team played which. 9th position is Melbourne City with 22 points, very much a far cry from their championship winning season last year, going near the bottom of the ladder. In fact, they're actually 2 points from the bottom at this point in time, which is crazy considering the players that they got on their team. It's just a couple of draws that's just kind of kept them out of near the bottom. Because obviously Wellington and the Wanderers ended up having 5 draws each, and obviously 2 extra losses compared to obviously the 2 draws that Melbourne City had. But they'd be right around the mix. In fact, realistically, they'd actually be in 11th right now if those 2 draws didn't go to their benefit. Because their goal difference would be less than the Wanderers right now. So, yeah, not great from them. Obviously, having a championship winning season last year, and then obviously kind of having things fall apart this season. 10th position is Perth Glory with 21 points. Then, obviously, 11th position is the Wanderers with 20. And then also on 20 points in last position is Wellington Phoenix. It's just obviously the goal difference there kind of hurting them. Though they have scored more goals than the Wanderers. And in fact, the fact that the Wanderers actually scored 4 this season, it's the first time we've put 4 in the back of the net for a long time. And with that, actually move out of being the bottom team in terms of scoring goals this year, because Brisbane Roar now have 19. Melbourne City have 20, and now we have 21. And Perth Glory is not actually that far in front of us. They actually only have 22. So we're actually doing relatively well now. If we can get into a situation of scoring more goals in a lot more games, that would help us in the long run in terms of goals for. Because, yeah, we're still so far behind the top. Obviously, the top is Newcastle Jets with 41, so we're 20 behind them. But yeah, going into this week, this week's game is against the Jets, so it's going to be one of those games. I feel like obviously Auckland are up against Perth on Sunday as well, so that's going to make things interesting. Macarthur can kind of make amends for their loss, because their next game is on Wednesday. Which will actually be the day that this goes up. It'll be the night of when this video goes up. They go against Mariners, who obviously Mariners are in 7th position right now. So they're going to try and fight for a spot in the top 6, obviously early on in the week. But yeah, we have Adelaide against Wellington, obviously Wanderers against the Jets at Macarthur. Excuse me, against the Jets at McDonald Jones, so they're playing Newcastle. So it's going to be great. I would think it'd be a great turnout. Obviously, Newcastle, their football has been really good. Obviously, and speaking on the NRL, obviously they're off to a flyer as well. We have a Big Blue as well late Saturday, so that's going to be very interesting in terms of what's going on with games and that. And then obviously Auckland FC on Sunday in New Zealand against Perth. So, yeah, going to be a distance derby for Perth, or at least one of them, because then they obviously go to play Wellington next round, which actually that scheduling actually works out really well for Perth, because they're obviously over in New Zealand at that point in time, so they'll probably stay in New Zealand for that week, I would assume, considering that that's a Sunday game and then the next one is a Saturday game for them. So we'll see what happens, but against the Jets, I don't fancy our chances. It's going to be a situation where obviously the Jets are going to rue obviously the F3 derby draw, obviously against Central Coast, and wanting to put points between them and Auckland to stay on top. So I hope that it's a close loss. If it is a loss, I'm expecting a loss, but we'll see what happens with results with that. But who knows at this point. But 4-0 win, we'll take the win obviously against Macarthur in a Western Derby. Obviously not as big as like the Sydney Derby, but we'll get that in a couple of weeks' time. So we'll see what happens when it comes to that, and obviously our form going into that, because we have obviously the Jets, then Brisbane, then Adelaide at home, and then obviously after that the Melbourne City before obviously going into the Sydney Derby in round 24. And then obviously finishing with Wellington Phoenix and Melbourne Victory. So there is some winnable games if we're going to try and make a run, like a late run to the top 6. But in saying that, when it comes to result with Macarthur and Central Coast, a lot of the teams that are underneath them trying to get into that top 6, and that's any of the teams from 7th right down, or 8th right down to 12th, because they even include Wellington Phoenix in that regard, because they're only 5 points behind, as well as the Wanderers. They'll want a draw in that, because obviously then it'll only be between Brisbane and Macarthur, it'd be only 3 points between them, and obviously it'd be 6 points between the bottom and 6th position. So you want a situation like, even if you want a Mariners win, obviously Mariners will move to 26 points. It'll still be 3 points going into Brisbane, and then obviously 6 points obviously between that and the bottom as well. So you could go for either result. You just kind of don't want Macarthur to win, but obviously they'll be ruining the 4-0 loss, and they'll have a fire in their bellies a little bit. It is a midweek game, so we'll see what happens with that, but who knows at this point. But 4-0 win for the Wanderers, we'll take the result, and we'll take that in stride. Fantastic win for them, and few goals on the board. Need more of that, please. More of that. And then we move overseas, obviously, to the Premier League. Obviously, Liverpool played against West Ham. We'll obviously talk about the Champions League in just a second. But it was a 5-2 win at home against West Ham United. Ended up being 3-0 at halftime. But Hugo ended up scoring in the 5th minute. Virgil van Dijk in the 24th minute. And Alexis McAllister in the 43rd minute before half-time. They got one back, but then Cody Gakpo scored in the 70th minute to make it 4-1. They scored Castellanos. That's not how to say his name. I'm terrible with pronunciation sometimes, especially when it comes to international players. They scored. West Ham scored their second in the 75th minute. And then we ended up having an own goal in the 82nd minute. In fact, actually, who did actually make that strike? Frimpong, who was back for this game. He was back because he'd been injured the last few weeks, obviously, which was pretty poor, like a pretty poor result, obviously, with a guy that obviously was in the game with Liverpool and did a great job, but his cross was diverted into the net against West Ham, so ended up being 5-2. Fantastic result, obviously, for Liverpool, and a hefty goal margin, obviously, with 3, which was really needed for the goal difference for Liverpool, because obviously before this game, I think it was like 7 or 8 at this point in time. Obviously, it was 7. And before that it was 6, so it wasn't even like a huge goal difference. Like, if you look at the goal difference, obviously Arsenal 30 plus 36, Manchester City 32, Man United 12, Chelsea 16, like a lot of the teams at the top. Obviously, Villa's kind of dropped a bit. They're down to 8, but they were up, in double digits and hefty double digits in terms of we're talking like in the teens, if not 20s, a few weeks ago. But it's one of those things where we just needed a few goals on the board, and obviously +3 at the end of a game is really good. So with that, there is a few position changes around the league. So first is still Arsenal with 64 points, though they have played an extra game because obviously they played against Wolves, and obviously in that draw against Wolves. 5 points behind them in second position is Manchester City with 59 points. So if Manchester City end up having an extra win, added to that, it's only a 2-point margin between first and second position. So that's why it's very important for Arsenal to keep getting into a situation and getting more points on the board. For them, it's going to be very difficult, obviously, because they've got more competition games to play. As well as, obviously, Manchester City has still got to play theirs as well. But obviously the pressure is on, especially Arsenal, to try and stay on top because they obviously have a situation where they could get a quadruple in terms of winning the Premier League, winning the FA Cup, winning, I believe they're still in the Carabao Cup and Champions League as well. So they got 4 chances at trophies this year, Manchester City probably in a similar boat. Obviously, they could possibly do 4 as well. I think they're still in the FA Cup, and I think they're still in the Carabao Cup. I believe. I might be wrong. Someone will probably say I'm wrong. Now here's the switch. Here's one of the switches. Third position is now Manchester United. They end up getting a win this morning. So they move up to 51 points, tied on points with Aston Villa, who's in 4th position. It's only just goal difference there. So ultimately, Aston Villa, especially losing to Arsenal a few weeks ago in that drubbing as well, they're +8 compared to +12 for Manchester United. So United move up behind Manchester City, 8 points behind City at this point, but in 3rd position for them. Aston Villa in 4th position. 3 points behind them and 48 points is another change, is Liverpool in 5th position, which means that Chelsea have dropped to 6th position. They ended up losing, obviously, today, earlier this morning, against Arsenal in their London derby. So they're 3 points adrift from the top 5 and 6 points adrift from the top 4 at this point in time. So bit of a drop for Chelsea. Only, yes, 1 position, but ultimately they were fighting in the top 4 a few weeks ago, and now they're in 6th position, with Liverpool obviously getting an extra win on top of them to get more points. But, it is what it is. Brentford in 7th position with 43 points. Everton in 8th with 40. Also on 40 points in 9th position is Fulham. And then rounding out the top 10 is Bournemouth with 39 points. So Bournemouth again have jumped back up again into the top 10. They've been flip-flopping all over the place. But again, in saying that, obviously that congestion from 8th right down to even talking about 15th position, that floor is like 9 points difference between the ceiling and the floor between 8th and 15th position right now, and especially with 14th position, with it being 35 being the floor and 40 being the ceiling there's a lot of different changes in between that middle, those middle teams. So Bournemouth on 39 points in 10th position. 11th position and 37 points is Brighton, and also on 37 points in 12th position is Sunderland. So Sunderland have dropped quite a bit. Obviously, they're staying relatively close to that top 10 position, which is good for them. Then Newcastle in 13th position with 36 points. 35 points in 14th position is still Crystal Palace. Then Leeds United in 15th with 31. which means that Spurs are still in 16th position on 29 points. Nottingham Forest in 17th with 27 points. And then obviously rounding out the relegation zone is West Ham with 25 in 18th position. 19th position is Burnley with 19. And then Wolverhampton Wolves, who actually ended up getting a win this week, moved to 13th, 13 points. And still, yes, in 20th position, 6 points behind Burnley at this point. But that also means that Derby County's record of the least amount of points in a season for the Premier League, which I believe was 11, will not be broken this year. Obviously, Wolves have had a reasonably good 2026. I will say, obviously, they were looking in dire straits for a lot there. But after that first win that they ended up getting, they've actually been accumulating a lot of points. Obviously, in their goal difference, it's minus 31 right now, which is not ideal for them, obviously. But in saying that, they've been getting points on the board. They've been getting draws. They've got a couple of wins on the board as well. In fact, let me have a look at the extended table. They obviously had a win this week, and they've had 2 draws and a win in the last 5 games for them. So realistically, and obviously Burnley has had 1 win and 1 draw in the last 5 games as well. And then West Ham have had 1 win, 2 draws as well. So that's kind of put them in front of both teams. But Wolverhampton this year, I think, has been relatively alright. Obviously, they've still lost a lot of games, but obviously they've accumulated a lot of points from where they were, because they ended up having 0 points for quite some time this season, and have done relatively well to, string in some points, come in with a couple of wins, obviously on the board for them, and just it's one of those things where it's, in fact, actually, how many draws have they actually got at this point in time? 7. So it's 7 points. So they've got 2 wins on the board. So this was their second win of the season for them earlier this week. So fantastic result, obviously, for Wolves fans. Obviously, still in the relegation zone, which is not ideal. And in fact, to try and get out of it, it's 14 points is the difference, which I doubt with how many games there's left. In fact, obviously they're the other team that have played an extra game, so they've only got 9 games left, I think, of this year compared to 10 games for everybody else. So not ideal for them. But still a great result, obviously, to get some wins on the board. And their lives are not going to get any easier, because Wolves actually play Liverpool twice this week. Because obviously they play them on Wednesday. So actually, when this video actually goes up, that result would have happened already. So we'll talk about that. I'll talk about that earlier next week. But we've got some in the next episode of How's My Team. But obviously they actually play both games at home, obviously, for Wolverhampton in the Premier League, obviously midweek, and then obviously FA Cup games playing on the weekend this weekend. So hence why Wolverhampton, 1, have actually played their extra game already, and 2, why some of the teams are going to be playing a lot midweek. So we play in the Premier League on Wednesday, and then on Saturday in the FA Cup 5th round against Wolverhampton. And then obviously after that, if whoever wins that 5th round fixture, whether it be with Liverpool, which most likely will be the case, but you would think. But obviously, if Wolves go through, then they'll play in the round of 16 in the FA Cup. So very interesting in terms of results for that. And then obviously we got into the Champions League, which is obviously the week after, the Wednesday after. We obviously had Atletico Madrid, Juventus, Club Brugge, and one other team that obviously were contenders to play us in the round of 16 for the Champions League. Obviously, ended up being Atletico Madrid winning, obviously, in their double legs, and also the other team that played against Juventus And out of the draw, it was obviously the team that I've had struggled to say their name, but Galatasaray, or Galatasaray. Obviously, they play us again, so obviously it was going to be a team that we played in the group stages, obviously, whether it was them or Atletico Madrid. But we play the away leg on the 11th of March, so we'll not talk about it next week. We'll talk about it, obviously, we'll kind of dive into it a little bit next week in the lead up to that game, but obviously we'll talk about it the week after when it comes down to that. And then obviously we play Tottenham on Monday that week before obviously the return leg at Anfield for that Champions League round of 16 clash. So ultimately it's going to be a very interesting month because obviously, and then after that we play against Brighton. So it's going to be a very interesting month, rest of the month. But obviously starting off with a really hot hand with a 5-2 win over West Ham, but a lot of the fixtures coming up are going to be very important. Obviously we want to put some behind Wolves in the Premier League. That'd be great for Liverpool, obviously, to keep in their top 5 position, obviously to fight for a spot in the top 4, because obviously, again, like I said, it was 3 points behind them. Aston Villa end up they play Chelsea, so it's actually going to be a situation where Chelsea could help us in many regards in this game. Arsenal play Brighton, Manchester City play Nottingham Forest, and Manchester United play Newcastle. So actually that fixture is actually going to be really interesting, especially with Newcastle having a situation where all the European teams from the Premier League that are in European competition have all gone through to the round of 16 clashes in their respective leagues. So first time in a long time that's happened. Or at least with how many teams are in there, because I think there's 8 teams in there right now, and all 8 of them have made it to the knockout stages in terms of like round 16 or above for those competitions. That's a pretty good result. But I could see that Manchester United Newcastle game being very interesting in terms of points as well. And in fact, if we get into a situation where we win by at least 2 or more, and Manchester United and Aston Villa do not make any points whatsoever, it could be a situation where Liverpool jump into 3rd position with their goal difference. They will definitely jump into 4th position if Aston Villa lose, because obviously the goal difference between Liverpool and Aston Villa are, Aston Villa have got less than Liverpool at this point in time, but it's only 2 goals between Manchester United and Liverpool at this point, so Liverpool could jump into the top 3 and definitely into the top 4 with a win and a loss with one of those games with Chelsea and with Newcastle. So going to be pretty interesting coming up. We'll see what happens with that, but hopefully, obviously we got the double with Wolverhampton this week before we go overseas for the Champions League and Galatasaray. That sounds right. Obviously saying it faster would be better, but obviously that the way that's pronounced sounds right. But obviously 5-2 win over West Ham, great for Liverpool, great result, especially in the fight for the Premier League. And now we'll go over some miscellaneous stuff. Obviously we'll talk about the Asian Cup, the Women's Asian Cup, because it just started last night. 1-0 win for Australia over the Philippines. Sam Kerr was the goal scorer, scored in the 14th minute. There was a couple of opportunities, obviously, that the women could have had, shooting long range as well, which is not ideal for them. But in saying that, it could have been a lot more. Last time they played them, especially in Perth, it was an 8-0 drubbing. So for the Philippines, I guess it is a win for them, because obviously the goal difference in terms of group stages to go into the knockout stage of the Asian Cup competition, especially it works very similar to the World Cup. So It's a situation where the more goals for that you have, and the less the deficit, the better in terms of group stage. Because if you're tied on points, it goes to goal difference, and that's very important when it comes to the end of that competition, and the end of the group stage of that competition. So it's going to be very interesting for them. We'll talk about the Cubs. Obviously, the Cubs have done relatively okay. The Angels ended up beating them. Obviously, after that win, last week, the Angels ended up beating them 5-4. Then we beat the Dodgers yesterday. We also beat the Cleveland Guardians as well. Very close game. And then obviously today, in fact 35 minutes ago at the time of this recording, the White Sox beat the Cubs. Again, for the second time in spring training. So not ideal. That makes it 4-6 for Chicago. In fact, they only scored 1 run today, which was very unlike them in the last few games. Obviously, they've scored 6 the game before against the Dodgers. The Dodgers were pretty It was 6-0 at one stage, I think very late into the 8th inning, I believe, when when the Dodgers actually started scoring, if not the 9th inning. So there's that. They scored 8 against the Guardians the day before, and then scored 4 against the Angels in a very, very close loss. It ended up being a situation where they were going to look like they were going to lose by a decent amount, and they ended up running it back and then just couldn't get on the board, and obviously got beaten by the Rockies as well the game before that, which kind of sucks. Obviously, after the win against the Padres, 14 runs to 7. So they've put some runs on the board, and then obviously today they kind of shit the bed and didn't put more than 1 on the board. That is what happens sometimes. Ultimately, we go into tomorrow. They play against one of their rivals in the division, in the Reds. So the Reds have actually played 2 games less than the Cubs at this point in time. Obviously, the Reds, I think, did they play today? Yes, and they lost to the Las Vegas Athletics. I was going to say Oakland Athletics, but that's not what they are anymore. And then after that is the lead up to the World Baseball Classic. So they actually play against Italy in obviously a warm-up game, and then play the Brewers the day after. So very big game for the Cubs, especially with Cubs players being out. Then obviously after that it's Diamondbacks, then the Cubs play the Padres again, then Athletics, and then the Giants, as in San Francisco, and then I think they have the day off. Yeah, they have the day off after that on the 10th of March. So play quite a few games, obviously, before leading into the Rangers. In fact, actually, even just looking at the schedule, if I can get the schedule up, that'd be interesting. Leading into April, we'll just go with the 1st of April. So I'm guessing March 29th, I think, is when the season goes back, because they play 2 games against the Nationals, and then 3 games against the Angels at the start of April. So I'm assuming that's when the season starts, is late March for the Cubs on the 29th. No, they play the Nationals on the 27th. Yankees, Brewers. Okay, I might be wrong. I'm not sure. We'll see. I'm not sure, but we'll get into a situation. Obviously, we'll sort that out. Obviously, when the Cubs get closer to playing their season, but yeah, so few wins, few losses. Cubs have been up and down all over the place during spring training. Hopefully that's a good omen because, when they've done relatively not great in preseason, they've done really well in the season. So we'll hope for that they do get some good results on the board and get some runs on the board as well. But we'll see what happens. But pretty interesting week, obviously coming up. Like I said, Liverpool obviously playing Wolverhampton twice coming up. Obviously, I think Australia play Iran in the Asian Cup as well. I think that's Thursday, I think is the next game. And then they obviously play Korea, I believe, on Sunday as well for them. The Wanderers obviously going to the Jets to play them, and then obviously opening round, obviously for the Giants against Hawthorn. Titans will play away to the Sharks as well. So pretty blockbuster week this week. I'm going to be full of results, and we'll see what happens with all that. But there's a lot going on next week, so we'll have to get into that when we get into that. But with all that said, thank you guys so much for watching this episode of How's My Team. This has been Macarthur 100. You guys have a great night, of course. Take care.